Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the AWS Public Sector DC Summit. I'm Isabella Mayer, and I'm going to be one of your room hosts today. So before we begin, I just have some quick housekeeping information to share with you. The emergency exits are just right behind you, to the left and to the right-hand sides. The restroom is immediately out the doors to the right-hand side. Please be sure to download our app and share your feedback on each session immediately after each session. And then also, please be sure to silence your phones. All AWS sessions you see today are going to be recorded, and they will be available after the event. And please welcome to the stage Jamil Brown and Elizabeth Boudreau.
All right, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Jamil Brown. I've just flown in from Sydney yesterday, so if I fall asleep up here, that's why. It's midnight back at home. I run the AWS Professional Services business for public sector in Australia and New Zealand back at home. So I'm really excited to be here with all of you today. You may have noticed there's a bit of a change. This is not Nick standing next to me or sitting next to me. Unfortunately, Nick had a flight problem yesterday and wasn't able to make it at all. So he's stuck back in sunny Los Angeles. I think that might have been intentional. But that's myself. I'll hand over to Elizabeth to introduce herself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Boudreau. I'm a healthcare executive advisor here in public sector at Amazon. And today we're really excited to talk about operating models and how things change when you move to the cloud. And first, I like to start with something that's not quite what we think about when we come to an Amazon session. And it's this statement that cloud adoption is not just a technical problem. We think of bells and whistles, and Amazon has all these services, and we want to try all these new things, but true adoption of the cloud isn't adoption of technology. It's how we operate, it's the people we work with, it's how we interact with each other, and this is where cloud adoption is not a technical problem. I come from the world of healthcare. And the way I like to think about it is everybody comes to professional services and they say, I want a prescription. Amazon Web Services, you've done this before. Just tell me how to implement it. It's got to be easy. You must have a script. You must have a way to do this. So the way I equate this in healthcare is a prescription. And what my customers want is a prescription for 2 pills. So on Friday, they feel great and they can enjoy their weekend, nice and healthy. But it's not that easy. I wish I had a solution like that. Instead, cloud adoption is a little more work. It's like diet and exercise. Who enjoys getting that prescription from their clinician? You have to participate. I'm going to say that again. You have to participate. So why is it like diet and exercise? Because diet and exercise is not one size fits all. We work together, we collaborate, and we find what is the right option for you. But you have to have some skin in the game. You have to participate. You have to make sure you're eating the right things and doing the exercise that we prescribe to get the best outcome. So when we talk about the cloud, we have to not only implement the technology changes, but the organizational ones as well. And that's where Amazon is here to help make that definition of what is the right change for you and how we're going to implement it. And while we talk plenty about Moore's Law and curves, I like John Fisher's curve because it talks about people. It talks about what we actually go through when we're on this journey. And it is a journey. We're not doing a light switch off on big bang moment. We're growing into it. It's not a project. It's a new lifestyle. And when we think about Fisher's curve, we have to think about a very simple phrase that I like to tell all of my customers. When thinking about your staff, you have to answer the question, what does this mean to me? Think about that for a moment. because it affects everyone. It's going to be your IT office, HR, training, finance, procurement. In the end, everybody is egocentric. We're all human. So if we think about it that way of what does this mean for me, it changes how we think about the non-technical parts of cloud adoption. So we start with people thinking at an anxiety level. Can I cope? What does this mean to my job? You're going to go to manage database services? I'm a DBA. Do I have a job? You're going to the cloud? Wait, my job is to run data centers. What does this mean to me? So as we go through this curve, we want to be able to address these types of emotions with our staff, thinking about how it's going to impact. But we've got to make sure we continue to address them. Because while I may move up through denial, because everybody's seen somebody in denial, we need to make sure we bring them back down and get them into a positive understanding. Because in the end, we always want to end with, this will be good. We are doing change for betterment, not change for change's sake. And when we think about this change, it's not incremental change. This isn't an upgrade. This isn't a new server. A butterfly is not a better caterpillar. It's a different organism. And your operations are going to be a whole different organism when you move into the cloud. And if we think about it that way, it changes our perception of the work we're doing, how we're engaging people, and how we bring this all back together. So with that, I want to bring Jamil up to talk about what exactly are these operating models that we're talking about to get people back on track, working together, and having a successful cloud adoption.
Thanks. So I actually joined AWS a couple of years ago in our commercial organization, and I'm sort of a reformed techie by background, and so I spent the first few months here really focusing on the technology, what AWS does, the individual cloud services, et cetera, et cetera. And when I was out seeing customers, I realized that very few of our customers were asking a lot of detailed questions about technology. Those questions came up, and when they came up, we were able to answer them, and we were able to answer them well. But they generally had a good idea of technology. They might be asking, how do I best use this service or that service? The harder questions that customers kept asking us was, as Elizabeth was saying, how do I change my operating model to take advantage of this? How do I turn my organization into a more nimble beast? How do I take advantage of cloud to deliver better services out to my customers ultimately? And that's, generally speaking, not a technology question. So we've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years looking at operating models, what works and what doesn't, what our customers see, what they don't. Let's talk through a couple of areas. So some of you may have seen the Amazon Flywheel. If you haven't, I'd urge you to go and have a look at it. But it's what powers our business. And there's a second flywheel which isn't as commonly known, which you can see in front of you, which is really about how do we experiment quickly. For me, this flywheel really starts with experiments in the middle top there. We've got to be able to run lots of experiments to see what our customers like and what they don't like, get that feedback, and use that to iterate so that ultimately we can deliver customer value back to them. So you start with experiments. This leads to a good customer experience, hopefully, leads to further adoption, leads to further feedback from customers, leads us to running more and more experiments. Now, the how around that is our teams. So we like to decouple our teams so that they can reduce their time to value ultimately. We decouple our teams from each other so that they're not dependent on other teams to get what they need done. So if you're familiar with Amazon itself, the Prime team is different from the Prime Music team, is different from the Prime Video team, et cetera, et cetera. So they all work on their own time frames to accelerate time to value. All of this ultimately is enabled by AWS and cloud, and we find that our customers really respond well to this, and AWS customers look at this flywheel and go, this makes a lot of sense within my organization as well. It might for you. Now, this is a little bit different, obviously, between the public sector and the commercial space, but the same basic concepts still apply. At least that's what we find. It's a good segue, almost like we planned it earlier around non-technical challenges, but this is absolutely true. So the experience that I've had over the last couple of years is that most of the challenges that my customers face aren't technical. We can solve the technical problems. There's lots of great partners to help with technical problems. There's lots of great wikis out there and everything else to help you solve the technical problems. Ultimately, the hard ones and the things that stop organizations from making best use of cloud, not just as a different infrastructure service or as a different data center, but ultimately as a transformational capability, are people. Corporate culture and values. Not every organization is able to be nimble. Not every organization is set up to be nimble. What is your operating model? And we'll talk a little bit about that. What does your organizational structure look like? Power distribution and control systems. You know, in a world where you're consuming infrastructure on a pay-as-you-go model, does the old method of approval make sense in this new world? How do you control finances? How do you control what people are allowed to do? Those are the really hard questions, and ultimately the questions that stop our customers from making better use of cloud. Role skills and career paths, so important. You get a lot of resistance within traditional IT organizations often because people go, well, I've been a data center tech for the last 20 years. What am I going to do in this new world? And ultimately they go, well, I don't want to do this. And that can reach up into higher levels of the organization as well. The person in your organization who's responsible for data centers and who's responsible for all of your infrastructure may be asking questions like, what does my job look like in this brave new world? Other questions, how do I compensate people in this world? Well, you know, it may have been span of control before. Maybe that changes in the new world. And also leadership. Does your leadership know the changes that cloud will bring? Will they be able to make good use of it? Do they understand some of these other pieces to the puzzle? This is ultimately the hard question. The technology will solve itself. And that's from a reformed techie. For us, fundamentally, the journey to leveraging AWS to enable a modern cloud-optimized organization is really about transforming the people and how they operate. That's the fundamental crux of the problem. When you move to AWS, it enables your organization to anticipate and respond to your customers' expectations in ways that may not have been possible before, right? The ability to move quickly, the ability to meet demand, the ability to experiment like that Flywheel demonstrated might not have been possible before. The interesting question, I think, is in order to be able to obsess over your customers, you've actually got to know who they are. So everyone knows who their external, well, sorry, I won't say everyone. Most people know who their external customers are. Very few organizations spend a lot of time talking about who their internal customers are. When we talk about cloud, your internal customers become just as important as your external customers. You've got the business itself. That is a customer of your cloud platform and ultimately a customer of IT. You've got your developers themselves, you've got the operators, you've got other stakeholders, and of course you do have your external customers. You've got to consider all of these stakeholders separately and go, what will add value to them? Ultimately, they all have different needs. You know, your external customers care about your new features, how much you can personalize the platform for them. Your business might care about time to value. Your developers, ease of use, how good is the platform? Can I self-serve? Ops folks, what's my visibility across the platform? What does that look like? Can I audit it? Do I have sufficient resiliency, etc.? Your various stakeholders like security, your CFO for cost, stability, etc. All of these people matter to your cloud platform, and I will point out none of them are technical needs. They're all about your business fundamentally. So how do you deliver experiences that in the end surprise and delight your customers? Our experience is moving to a modern operating model, and that will include changes that enables your consumers and suppliers of services to work together to provide a superior experience. That's how you deliver experiences that surprise and delight your customers ultimately. So how do we define an operating model? And in this case, we're talking about an operating model for IT. So an operating model that defines how business and IT align and operate to reach strategic business objectives. So we tend to split it up into 4 quadrants with a couple of columns and a couple of rows. So the rows that you've got there up the top are around your applications, at the bottom around your platform, and the columns are engineering and operations. And we'll talk a little bit about the different operating models, and you'll see how we look at this when we come to the next couple of slides. But ultimately, your operating model affects your migration path to AWS. We find that the business objectives break into a few different categories. You've got your sustain category. This is really about applications that eventually are going to be sunset or replaced by something else. You've got undifferentiated or commoditized capabilities. You're doing minimal investment here. What's IT doing? They're keeping the lights on at this point. And this is appropriate for the sort of rehost applications that you see. Really, we often see a very traditional operating model in this space. For optimize objectives, well, these are the capabilities that run your core business functions, things like SAP, other systems central to your business. IT here, what's IT focused on? Resiliency, availability, security, scalability, those sorts of basic concepts, really optimizing the platform as they go. Then you've got the grow section down at the bottom. This is really about the capabilities that are the future of your business or your organization. This is where you're gaining market share. This is where you're entering new markets. This is where you're launching digital capabilities. What's IT doing there? IT is trying to get out of the way and allow the business to experiment and move as quickly as humanly possible. And you can see how these tie into the 6 R's, if you're familiar with those, which are our migration paths into AWS. So what do we see commonly within enterprises? We see operating models that look like this. Operating models that generally have separate teams working independently from each other. So if we think about those traditional applications where we're just keeping the lights on, what do we see? You know, you've got a dev team, perhaps. You may just have the software vendor looking at that. You've got cloud platform engineering putting out basic standards and the like. And then you might have an MSP or an ops team that's actually operating that platform on a regular basis. Often those two sides don't talk to each other. You're keeping the lights on. That's what we commonly see for those sustain type of apps. For optimized apps, you've usually got a dev team of some kind. You've got an operations team that sits across the application and the platform. And then again, you've got a cloud platform engineering team. Sometimes they cut across operations, sometimes they don't. Often there's still a lot of separation. And if we look at Grow, what we usually see in this space is a DevOps team. And the DevOps team tends to cover the application engineering and the operations, but they tend not to do a lot on the platform side. So the question is, do these operating models work? And the answer is, from our point of view and in the experience we've had with our customers and from the feedback we get, none of these are optimal for any one of these approaches. What do we like to see? What do we recommend? So in the sustain space, what do we recommend? A much tighter linkage between cloud platform engineering and your ops team. Ultimately, for most of our customers, the type of applications that fall into the sustain space, these are transitional applications. They're moving away from these in some way. And so there's not a lot of point in investing deeper into these applications. If we look at the cloud ops space, what does it look like? A DevOps team that sits across both engineering and operations for the application, as well as a cloud platform team that sits across both engineering and operations for the cloud platform. You've got to bring dev and ops together, both from a platform point of view and from an application point of view. And when we look at the true Grow capabilities, this is where you have true multifunctional DevOps teams that cover both the platform and the application from an engineering and an operations standpoint. You may still have a cloud platform engineering team that provides capabilities that all of your DevOps teams share, some basic foundational capabilities, but ultimately you want to see multifunctional teams in this space that have authority across the entire problem space. So why don't we talk about how we actually make this happen, and I'll hand back over to Elizabeth.
Sure. If we think about, we've talked a lot about people. And in your cloud adoption, who has thought about your people model and how you're going to change? Anybody? Oh, the hands are getting a little better year over year. This is excellent. We're moving in the right direction. But we want to think about staffing all of this, which, especially in public sector, tends to be a big concern. We don't necessarily have the money to go out and pay what we may pay on market share. We may not be able to change contracts. We may be in government. We may be in unions. So what do we do to get to these optimized models? We want to source from within. So to be incredibly tactical about this, we want to say, if this was your role prior to the cloud, what do you think your role looks like as we move forward? Because really, if you want to think about your next round of tech all-stars, they probably already work for you. And that's the good news. We want to take those people and train them and get them that experience so that they can be elevated to your newest unicorn rock star, and you're not going and sourcing them out there. Obviously, this probably isn't going to happen overnight. It's going to take some work and it's going to take some effort. But if we look at certain areas, starting at the architecture, probably have somebody you call an architect, be it operations, enterprise, or security. It's great. We need that skill set in the cloud. We just have to give you a cloud flavor for it. One of the bigger changes we tend to see is once we get to the infrastructure layer, because people were siloed. They did this task only. Well, now we're going to that DevOps model. We need to know breadth of services. So maybe you just did infrastructure compute. Maybe you were a network engineer, just app. Now we want you to go end to end. We want you to do development all the way to ops. So we're going to train across the board and make a cloud infrastructure engineer. This tends to be a big change for people, but we're investing in the people. We're investing in our organization to upskill to make this work. Other things you'll see is business IT alignment is even more crucial. As IT becomes an enabler of these business opportunities, we want to move a lot of times into agile methodologies. We may use Scrum models. We may go into sprints. So we need to have the voice of the customer involved, and that's where the product owner comes in. We need to make sure that what we're doing, again, is not change for change's sake, but change for enablement. And that's where we want the product owner to know the business, bring that business need into the IT to be serviced. PMOs change. Anybody else have traditional waterfall PMOs still? I'm a recovering PMP, so I can admit I've been there, done that. I've now moved into being a Scrum coach. But we want to think about how do we retrain people to think about this old school, it takes too long to get there. As a customer, I was a CIO at a genetics laboratory, and I used an old EMR system, you know, those kind of things where when you do an upgrade, it takes 6 to 9 months, and then you sweat for a week thinking about, well, this actually going to go live and be okay, or am I shutting down an entire company? Anybody had similar ideas of that? So I got the air mattresses ready because we're going to do it on a weekend, and God knows if anybody gets to go home. And then the new model, they said, no, we're just going to do it Wednesday at noon. Excuse me? You're going to do what in the middle of my week? In the middle of patient care? Yeah, we're just going to run an upgrade. So I had to swallow my pride a little bit and let it happen after much less than polite conversations. And it worked. My staff had no idea an upgrade happened. It just refreshed on their screen. And from then on, Wednesday at noon was our new day that we pushed new code every week with no concern. We had rollback models. Everybody was trained in what to do. We had moved to blue-green, and it was a new way of being. And we no longer had to hide the air mattress when we had new employees coming on board and didn't want to scare them. That was a pretty cool place to be. You gave your staff back their lives. They got to do what they wanted on nights and weekends versus on-call and upgrades. So this is a big change. We're not just changing what your job is, but how you function in that job. And finally, we're changing how we work with the applications. So no longer are we throwing things back and forth over the wall. We're giving ownership. And we referenced the leadership principles from Amazon, and one of them is ownership. I own my application. I can make changes to it. I can push it out, and I can support it. IT is giving me the platform, and as an application owner, I can do this. So this is a great model to think about, that I have these people in-house. I just get to get them to the next level. But I like to think about what's the takeaways. What are our best practices? And this is my favorite slide for that. There's a lot of information here, but there's a lot to be said. And it starts at the top, executive sponsorship. I want the executive who's involved, not the one who makes a proclamation of we're moving to the cloud and walks away, but the one who proclaims we're moving to the cloud and says, I'm with you to support you. So making sure you get that executive sponsorship because it's aligning to the business. And it's not just getting one executive sponsor. It's getting all those stakeholders. So as before, it's getting your CISO for security, your CFO for cost, budget, and moving them all along the journey with you. Second, it's really successful to set a cloud-first strategy. You need an impending event or a cause for this. Because again, we're not just changing because there's fun new features, we're changing for our organization to do more, better, faster, and hopefully cheaper. So we want to create that vision and incentivize people to come along. I like to call it positive internal peer pressure. If one part of the organization does this and does it well and sees great positive motion, usually the top goes, they did it, why aren't you? But you don't want to be on the second half of that conversation. You want to be the example. And finally, as we started with, next we're going to think about experimenting. Try things. The beauty of the cloud is that it doesn't work, turn it off. You didn't buy, rack, and stack a server. Turned it on, you turned it off. The cost of experimenting has greatly decreased. And with more and more service stacks that we're releasing and managed services, it's even easier. So try it. But don't forget the governance, or your CISOs will get mad at me. We need to think about this. We're going to do it with guardrails to keep people in line, make sure we're doing this in the right way, but we measure what we do, we're monitoring, and then we continue to iterate on that. And what we're iterating is not just what technology we're using, but what are our principles and standards that do that? And the secret to this is don't let them be a secret. Publish them. Tell people what you're giving them. If you're doing restrictions, tell them why. Communicate what you're doing, because that's going to be the hardest part, is making sure people know what you're doing and why you're doing it. Who does this communication? We very much talk about a cloud center of excellence. These are that centralized group of people who at the beginning do that learning, bring up that skill set. But we're going to rotate them through so that we can make more people at this level. And as this continues to evolve, they become that cloud platform team. They become that internal consulting business that can help different parts of the organization become more self-sufficient. But as that happens, your organization's going to change. You're going to change your operating models, hopefully into one of our curves, one of the quadrants we told you about. But the policies and the procedures come along with that. Again, it goes back to communication. If you haven't told anybody you've changed, it's not going to work. And finally, have a roadmap. Start small and iterate, but have a vision of where you're going. We can do Scrum, we can do Agile, we can do 1 and 2 week sprints, but we still want a plan of where we're going and what we're going to get out of this. So from a business perspective or mission perspective, we want to accomplish A, B, and C by Q1, 2, 3, etc. And publish it, talk about it, get feedback on it. Because maybe there's some place in the business you don't even know about that's doing this or needs to do this, and you can be there to help them. So as we think about these successful journeys, you can do it. A small organization can do it, and a large enterprise can do it. You don't have to be any perfect thing, but you have to do what's best for you and your org, not the published standard. Again, we're going back to diet and exercise. We have to find what is right for you, how to implement it, and how to keep it as a sustaining model. And with that, we want to talk a little bit about what we've seen in our models.
Okay.
So let's chat.
Let's chat in front of our 100 closest friends here. So to warm up the room, I've got a few questions for you, and then we'll kick it back out to the room. So let's start with an easy one. In your experience, how do you find that op models change when organizations move to the cloud?
We see it gradual, right? We talked about quadrants, where you think you should go and where you ultimately go. But we see the ownership, we see the collaboration that we didn't necessarily before. Maybe my IT team never talked about finance, never talked about procurement problems. They just received things. Now we're going to change the model of ownership, and that my development team knows what they're spending. They have full transparency to it. So we change who interacts with who takes on what positions, and what we want to do about that. As we think about that, moving models, it's exciting. It's scary. It's change. It's scary. But it's a new way to think about things, and that creates excitement in a space that maybe felt stale in some of our legacy organizations.
And does that create more accountability within some of these organizations? You talk about developers knowing how much they're spending. Does that drive some accountability within the organization that didn't exist before?
I absolutely think so. My personal example is when we started our laboratory, I'd show up with Scrum for every $500 they spent. I would show up with a billing alert. And so they had to answer, did they have more patients come through, or did somebody leave something on overnight? That was something they never thought about before on an on-prem. Everything's free on-prem, it's just there. Yeah. Now they were accountable for what they were doing, what the business needed us to do, and how we continued to budget along the year.
Okay, thank you. And a specific one, again, in your experience, how do outsourced models change with cloud?
I think this is a big change, especially in the public sector, where we've had a world of contractors. We've had a world of outside vendors who have come in. Now, if I start, especially in hybrid cloud, a lot of our public sector organizations aren't necessarily going all in, and we support that. And so if we think about the hybrid model, maybe we ran the data centers, and we outsourced other things. I see the flip happening. We're starting to insource what's important to us as an organization to our mission, and outsource the non-differentiated. So a very concrete example is if I'm going to build a new application, the IP of what I need to build, my team is developing, but I'm going to outsource to a developer who can write code for me. I may not have to keep a coder on staff. Or my cloud team comes in, my cloud platform team now as an internal team, and I've outsourced my data center. Because I still have a data center in a hybrid world or a colo. I outsource the old legacy work, and I keep the new interesting work in my organization. And when we think about it that way, it helps with staff retainment and staff excitement. They're doing the cool things. I'm not hiring a contractor to come in and do that. I'm allowing my staff to do that. And in public sector, this doesn't happen overnight, right? We have long-term contracts. My favorite use of a contract is that one sentence we put at the bottom, other duties as assigned. Anybody make sure you always put that one in? Because that allows you a little bit of flexibility until you get to a resource contract where you can say, I know we brought you for this, but we're starting to move this model. Or to my outsource agency, now I want you to bring in staffing that has this skill set because this is my new normal at my organization. So it's creating a communication with who we outsource with our contractors, and with our internal staff to decide as an organization, what do we inherently want to own, what do we want to collaborate, and what do we want to fully outsource.
That makes sense. So outsource the undifferentiated heavy lifting, keep in-house what makes a difference to my business.
What is special to
ultimately.
us?
What's special to us? That makes sense. Last question, and then we'll throw it out to the audience. How does end user demand for services change when an organization adopts cloud?
This has been one of the most dramatic changes, actually, we've seen with the cloud. Over 50% of an organization's IT spend can be happening outside of IT. Who has shadow IT? Who doesn't want to tell us we have shadow IT? I come from the world of researchers who had NIH grants, who bought a server and stuck it under their desk and didn't talk about it. And with that grant, they never did anything except leave it there. Talk about a security nightmare. I was the HIPAA privacy and security officer. I preferred not to go to jail over my job. And as we think about it that way, we want to know what's happening. A big area that I see spend happening that was outside IT starting to come in is marketing. Because now we can do the cool things. We can personalize the end user experience. We can use these new service stacks with the MLII. And now they're coming to IT because IT can make it happen. So now if we think about where our organization's budget is it's not going out to another agency. It's staying within the org and we're reinvesting in ourselves. And that's a great place to be. If we think about defense a little bit, we need to keep the mission drivers. What are we trying to do? What warfighter are we supporting? And if that's the case, again, we want to centralize IT, especially on a security perspective. Make sure we think about where is my data, what's happening to it, and who's controlling it. We have a full transparency in the cloud for that we didn't necessarily have in an on-prem or shadow IT world. So by bringing it back in, we've enabled our capabilities, we've staffed our team, we've become an exciting part of the organization to be in because we do the new stuff, and we're moving our business and our mission.
Okay, thank you. One of the things that I've seen in there as well is that, and I think you said it, the demand was always there. The business wanted the services to be provided, they just couldn't get them in the way that they wanted, has been my experience. So I'd be curious to see what you think about that.
I agree. Who comes from a department of no, not now, call me later, maybe next year? We think about that. Now it's, okay, I'm ready. When do you need it? 5 minutes? A couple hours? That's a completely different conversation. And if we think about it even extending into cost, you don't have to have an always on dev, test, staging environments. We spin it up, we spin it down. I love the organization says, no, we moved to the cloud. Everything has to be on 24/7. My developers, they work at all of the hours. Okay, we can do that. And in 3 months, IT can come back and say, you know, actually only 2 people logged in between 8 p.m. and 5 a.m. during the week, and maybe nothing between Saturday morning and Sunday afternoon. Can I turn those off and save you 40%? When has IT come to the table saying I can save you money? And so again, we're driving business value and we're speeding business value.
Okay. Thank you. So we'll throw it out to the audience. I think there's some mic runners around the room, so just put your hand up if you've got a question for us, please. There's one at the back.
From a small association perspective, training budgets are incredibly tight, and it's going to possibly take me 2 to 3 years to level up my team's skills. What sort of strategies have you seen effectively shorten that time that you can really level up and start moving much faster?
You wanna take it?
Absolutely. So when we started our laboratory, I had 2 technical people to run an entire clinical laboratory and 0 cloud experience. So this is where it sounds like I'm on the sales portion, but we used AWS Professional Services. They came in, and in 6 weeks, we built an entire lab infrastructure, got certified, and we were doing clinical work. I couldn't have done that in on-prem world. But it's the idea that we're skilling up, we're training by doing, train the trainer, teach somebody to fish model. The other thing that's come out since reInvent, which I think is very exciting, is the amount of free digital training we put out there. We have hundreds of training modules for free. We have an extensive list of partners who offer training and have great ways to help you think about how much time you have, so how much can you do in a certain time frame. It's about what your speed is and what your goal is. You can learn to fly the plane while you're building it, or you can have somebody help you build the plane and then you're just in fly mode. So it's going to come down to budget, and by budget I don't just mean money, but how much time can you take your resources off their current workload and allow for them to do that learning to upskill.
I'd add one thing as well. We have an organization that we work with in Australia who is facing a very similar problem. And one of the things they found was when they gave their staff access to some of the free resources that are out there, one of the unintended consequences of that is they discovered which staff were actually interested in moving forward and learning something. If you put everyone into a room, into a classroom, and tell them, you have to learn, you don't figure out who wants to learn in that classroom. But if you give a whole bunch of people access to free or very cheap training, you find out in a few months who actually wants to make a change within the organization and who doesn't. And the reality is a certain percentage of people don't want to change, and some of those people aren't going to change. Gives you some insight into who those people might be within the organization.
And you always find the hidden gems.
That's right.
It's that person who does stuff at night that you had no clue what they were working on, but they somehow love developing, or they love a certain part of the technology. And they all of a sudden have elevated you to a place you didn't even think you could get to for an extended period of time.
Yeah. The other great quote, which I love, was one of the CIOs that we work with actually asked the question of, well, what if I train people and then they leave? They've now got a whole bunch of marketable skills, et cetera, and I'd love to take credit for it, but I didn't say it. Somebody said, well, what if you don't train them and they stay? Which I think is a really valid way of looking at it. And that started a whole conversation around training. So hopefully that answers your question.
So to that point, in public sector, we do need to worry about keeping our people and training them. So the flip side of that is make the work exciting. Make it be the place you want to work with those skill sets. And we are doing really exciting things in public sector. We have a whole list of sessions about this over the next couple of days. Go learn about it, because if you make your work exciting, they don't want to go somewhere else with their skills. They do want to stay.
Sorry, there's a mic coming to you. Just a second.
So first of all, thank you so much. I think this was really useful for, especially for me. I'm sure it must be for the other people too. The steps you laid out for a successful journey, do you have examples within the federal government where people have successfully undertaken that journey so that we could learn from them and learn a little bit more about the details of what is involved there? Are there documented cases?
I might hand this over to you since
Yes,
I'm Australia-based.
I've spent quite a bit in organizations that start with Department of, or in the DoD space in the last year or two. We do have use cases out there. Last year we spoke about US Transcom having a great success story. We continue to work with multiple other organizations that will be presenting this week, so I hate to steal their thunder too early. But please talk to me after. I'd love to follow up.
So we've got a couple of public references in Australia as well, which are somewhat comparable. So our tax office has gone a long way down this journey, as well as Australia Post. That might help. Any other questions? Mike's coming to you.
So in the growth model, you had the cloud operations or cloud center of excellence, which was pretty slim and lean. How do you keep it like that? Because when you have the transformation from traditional hosting operation into the cloud, you have a ton of people, and you have people who have their own power and kingdoms and want to protect them. So how do you deal with it? How do you able to scale it down?
Absolutely. So I'm going to pull this back up to talk through. The number one area where I hear that concern is around DBAs. Wait, I'm going to manage database service. 10 DBAs don't need to do that work again. Maybe I need 2 because I still need the work. Well, we reskill them. If I think about what a DBA is good at, is usually very detail-oriented work. I can do that in finance. I can do that in communications, product owner. So I think it's about keeping your staff, but maybe refocusing where they go and giving them new skill sets in that space. I have seen organizations that have completely staffed down. That is absolutely a way to go. Most of the organizations don't want to lose bodies, so they'll do the repurpose model versus the let go model.
I might add on to that. So I spent a fair bit of time over the last couple of years at the Australian Broadcasting Company, so a corporation, that's our public broadcaster. They are by and large a union shop, and so reducing the workforce is not actually an option for them within their organization. What they did was take a very detailed look at the various folks, what the new operating model was going to mean for them, figure out that some 50% of the organization didn't necessarily have an immediate home in the new world, especially given that they were running their new data centers. But what they did is talk to each one of those people and go, we want to expand into delivering new products and services. We want streaming capabilities. We want apps, etc. We want to invest in you to upskill you into that space. Where do you want to go in this space? So some folks didn't want to go anywhere, and they moved to a different organization within the public sector. A lot of folks decided they want to go through some retraining. Okay, another one.
So the role of Agile Scrum Master and Product Owner, do you think it's changing in any which way when we go to cloud?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
The role of Product Owner or Scrum Master, is it changing with cloud?
Yes, I think it's a voice that we didn't always have. The product owner, maybe with somebody we checked in with less regularity than we do in a new Agile, where they are part of the product team. They have the voice of the customer. They're in that demo retros feedback cycle that we see with Agile methodologies. And bringing that voice to the team, being part of the team, maybe even upskilling a little bit into the technology side to understand what the team's saying when they're sitting in those meetings becomes important. And I think business analysts is usually a title that I see what works really well moving into that new product owner type title. It fits with what they've been doing, but gives them more opportunities.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, another one over there.
So I won't re-answer her question because I have a different perspective, because it does bring a lot of value. There's a lot of change if you're going from an old waterfall type model for your app portfolio as you move toward the cloud. But my question is related to just transformation. I mean, you're really focused on run and grow here, but from a transformation perspective, say with architecture, solution architects, enterprise architects from the cloud perspective, do you have just what's your perspective on building up cloud momentum in the business as part of that change? We've had a lot of success using architects embedded in the product cycle, both in changing the legacy portfolio and gaining traction with the business toward more cloud development and cloud apps. But I was just curious on your perspective.
So one of the experiences I've had, and I don't know if this marries up with your experience, is in the old world, architects often didn't spend as much time with the business as they should. In fact, often they never spoke to the business or never really understood the business demand or the business drivers. They should, but they didn't. In the new operating model, if you want to make architects a real driver for cloud within your organization, you've got to get the architects talking to the business so that they understand the problems that the business are seeing, and then go, okay, the best way that I can solve this problem, so for example, business wants to iterate quickly, is by making use of cloud. Now this makes sense. Now I understand why we're going down this path. Otherwise, you tend to get locked into some very traditional ways of thinking in the architecture space, which go, I don't know this approach. It's just a different data center. Therefore, I'm not going to support this. But when you change the mindset, when you get them involved in the business outcomes, they understand why the old world way of operating can't deliver those outcomes, and then they become a driver for change. That's been my experience, but what do you think?
I agree. I used to send the technical team to shadow the business. Go spend a day, 2 days, once a quarter you had to spend a day with the business, learn what they were doing, and listen to those problems, because sometimes what they're telling you is the problem and what the actual problem is do not coincide. You have to be there to listen and hear what's happening to be able to pull that out and think about how we can solve that from an IT perspective.
So I think we've got time for one more question, so if anyone's got one. I
think we're good.
Okay,
Thank you all very much. Please feel free to contact us, but complete the session survey and enjoy the rest of your summit.
Thank you, everyone.